Hello there, and welcome to Ramadan Conversations. We're all in this together. It's presented by the Affinity Intercultural Foundation of Australia. I'm John Cleary, your host for this series of conversations presented throughout Ramadan. Ramadan is, of course, characterised by the iftar meal, the breaking of bread amongst friends and neighbours. COVID-19 has made that impossible this year, so Affinity has decided to carry Ramadan on this online platform. Ramadan Conversations is a daily 1 hour virtual iftar. Each episode will be live streamed and later available for download on Affinity's YouTube page. For tonight's episode, we're bound for South Australia. As a former ABC broadcaster with a special interest in religion, it's my great pleasure to host these conversations, together with a number of assistant hosts drawn from the Muslim community. This evening, we're joined by Afra Temizkan. Afra holds a Bachelor of Education from Monash University and is currently in her third year as a teacher and secondary girls coordinator at Adelaide's Pinnacle College. Afra, welcome.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Afra, I believe you arrived in Australia at the age of 9. As a young kid, what were some of the challenges you faced in a new country with a new culture? I mean, was it all a great big adventure for a little girl, or were the things you noticed you really missed and you felt uncomfortable about?
Well, I still remember the first day that my dad had told us that we're going to Australia, and I pictured this green land where the plane's going to land, and it's going to be all green and kangaroos and koalas, and it kind of was like that. Australia is a beautiful place, and we came to Wollongong, so it was in New South Wales, and as a 9-year-old, I think the biggest challenge that I probably had with my brother was just to trying to find out where we stood with our cultural identity. So we would
Mm.
often go out and try to form friendships in the neighborhood. Like, we would have bikes, and no one actually was playing around with their bikes at that time. And when we did meet people, and when we met some neighbors, we were like, oh, let's go meet them. And I remember trying to have like this Aussie name to trying to feel like I would fit into them and be like, I should be Elisa and you should be someone else, so that they can feel like we're Australian. But I think, yeah, I think the biggest challenge was that, and along with the learning of the language. Like, I still remember looking outside the window, and as my teacher would like read a book, and I would say, like, how am I going to learn this? How am I
Yeah.
going to be able to speak English? Is that day ever going to come? So it's been 15 years now, and I still remember those challenges. But yeah, I think like now everything is pretty much better. I probably identify myself as both Turkish and Australian. I think both of them. Yeah.
As a teacher at Pinnacle College, how much are you able to draw on your own experience for those students who are
Yeah.
going through similar experiences?
So, Adelaide, like the school that I teach at Pinnacle College, what really drew me to the school was the large amount of EAL learners and students from refugee backgrounds. So, as an EAL learner myself, I was like, I want to give back to the students who, I see the challenges that they are going through. I was once upon a time that girl who was trying to learn English, who was trying to fit in, who was trying to form friendships. So
Mm.
I can definitely, see myself in them, and the experiences that I've had kind of, give something to them that they can connect with.
Mm. How has this year with COVID-19
Mm.
affected your teaching practice? We hear a lot about schools, but have you been able to make a positive use of the crisis?
Um, I think like a lot of young people, they are familiar with the online platform, like they're familiar with the online world, but familiar in the sense with like social media and the social aspects.
Mm.
So the learning aspect was very new for both our students and for our teachers as well. It was like, forget everything, and now we're just going to go online, and I'm going to see you through a camera. So it was very, very new for us, but I particularly really enjoyed it because it just got to show both of us that learning can happen anywhere. As long as you're
Wow.
willing to connect and you're coming onto the classes online, it can happen anywhere at any time. So for most students, it felt like it was more self-paced. It allowed them more time at home. For me as well, I think it was great because we, saved a lot more time as well. We got through the content, we were connecting online through emails. And then, now in Adelaide, we're back at school. So because we don't have any new cases of COVID-19, which we're very grateful for.
Well, Afra, we could continue this part of the conversation for a long time, but it's time now to meet our first guest. Our first guest is Paula Luethen MP.
Yeah.
Paula is the Liberal member for King in the State Parliament of South Australia, elected just a couple of years ago in 2018. And prior to Parliament, Paula was working for BT Financial Group and also served in various community roles, including as a local councillor for Tea Tree Gully and as a supporter of survivors of sexual assault and abuse as part of the White Ribbon Project. Paula, welcome to this Ramadan conversation.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be joining you today.
Afra, the first question is in your hands.
Yes. So, Paula, what sparked your interest in politics? So why trade a successful career in financial services for the rough, tumble, insecurity and endless working hours of politics?
Well, thank you for the question. About 6 years ago, I was working at BT leading change in communication for the group, and I was lucky enough to get an executive coach to help me make a decision about where I wanted to go next in Westpac. And the coach that I had asked me over again, "What do you like to do, Paula?" And I said, "The thing I like most is helping people." And then he probably asked me the most important question I think I will ever in my lifetime be asked, and that was, what makes me really sad and what made me like mad? And what bubbled out of me was children being hurt. And along with, I think, that question and that answer came a lot of my childhood memories that in my 40s I had suppressed up until my 40s of growing up in violence and being sexually abused as a child as well. That all surfaced. And so madly I started researching as I was working in banking what today's situation was like. Would there be a child like me, which, because I could then remember at 12 years old saying to my parents what happened to me when I found out what it actually was. And would there be a child that could be in that same boat too? And I found out they could. That in fact in Australia they say 1 in 5 children will be sexually abused by their 18th birthday. 1 in 4 children are growing up in violent households witnessing domestic violence. And so I decided, because I like to help people, I know how to lead some change, and I have a passion and a fire in my belly to make children safer and give them a chance at a good childhood, that I would, rather than worrying about it and talking about it, that I'd actually put my hand up to do something about it. And so I approached one of my colleagues 6 years ago in the Liberal Party, and at the time he was a shadow education minister, and said, "What are you going to do about this?" And that was my starting point. And he said, "What are you going to do about it?" And that's how I got into politics, with a fire in my belly to work with the community on some change.
Well, let's touch on a couple of those issues. As both the recent Royal Commission and various state inquiries have found, much of that abuse occurred in institutions, many run by religious organisations. Are there particular lessons here that we've yet to integrate properly?
I think there's a whole lot of lessons and some excellent recommendations that have come out of that Royal Commission into institutional abuse. And I actually know one of the advocates that I think he said he sat on the steps of Parliament for 7 years, every month for 7 years in a row, to get people to pay attention to something needing to happen in that space. So again, another person with a fire in their belly calling for some change. There are a lot of important lessons that came out of that commission. I know in our South Australian government, we're paying very close attention to them. At the federal government, I know we're paying very, very close attention to those lessons and trying to get the redress for people for the pain that they've been through. I think one of the one of my observations about it is it isn't something that happened many years ago. It's things that could be happening to children now, and some of those examples are recent. They're not historical things. There is historical abuse, but there's a lot of risk out there still today.
Yeah, because
you also
it still
mentioned,
exists.
Yeah. You mentioned also domestic violence. During the present COVID-19 crisis, violence has been tagged as an area of increased risk. It's an issue of both state and national concern, as campaigners such as Rosie Batty have pointed out. Do you think services in this area are adequate? I know that, for instance, some groups have been concerned that, particularly with regard to refuge support, it seemed to have declined for a while over recent years. Do you think both state and federal governments have really put the amount of attention into this issue they need to, particularly at the resource end of refuge accommodation and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'm probably more versed with what we've been doing in South Australia, and certainly
Sure.
in our first 2 years, there's been a lot of legislation we've been tightening to make sure there are stronger consequences and penalties for people that do the right thing. An example of that is we've introduced a new piece of legislation to have a separate serious offence for strangulation, because research shows by the time someone gets to the point of strangling someone, the person's at a very high level of risk. And so there's legislative changes we've been making. In recent times, in the COVID time, of course, we're very worried about people that might be isolated with abusers. And so we've actually funded a men's helpline that men can go to if they're abuse themselves or they're needing help with their relationships. So that's been a recent thing we've introduced just in the last couple of weeks. In the last 12 months, we've increased the crisis line for anyone experiencing abuse to 24 hours a day. So that's some funding that we've put in. We're also looking in South Australia at ways that we can actually keep families in their home and wrap support around them in their home and actually remove the perpetrator, rather than just adding places for people to actually flee to as well. But I think, personally, one of the things I'm really passionate about as well is that we do more early years education as a prevention measure to actually teach our younger people what respectful relationships look like. So we start to not only deal with the crisis that we have, but we start breaking the cycle that we have in our community today.
Just an extra question there, Afra. I guess things like social media make that a particular challenge for teachers dealing with kids.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as Paula mentioned, the intervention begins at a very, very young age, and that comes from schools as well. Schools play a big role in this to teach the, young kids what a respectful relationship and a friendship looks like. And definitely.
Paula, there's a fair amount of cynicism around politicians these days. They're often seen as servants of their party first rather than the community. And if they do what's asked by their party at an appropriate time, they move on from Parliament to cushy roles in major donor organisations, even some of the most respected, such as Julie Bishop for the Liberals or recently Mike Kelly from Labor. As a relatively new, still idealistic, I trust, politician, what are your thoughts on this? How do we recover trust in the system?
Well, I think it's through, one of the things I would really like to see, and I'm encouraging community members to do all the time for local, state and federal levels of government, is to choose people wisely. I try to remind people as much as I can that they have a very powerful say, that every vote does count. And I know when I was running for a local government, lots of people wrote to me and asked me questions about why I was doing it and how I felt about particular topics. And I took every one of those questions very seriously. And then the same for state politics as well. I spent 10 months door knocking, people asking them what was important to them and having a personal interaction with people. And I want to encourage as many people in the community to actually reach out when elections are on and ask candidates questions, find out why they're running, how they feel about particular topics, rather than just, being cynical and not having a say. There's a lot of power that people have to choose the right people as well. One of the things I think, maybe we need to think of as well is I've got a fire in my belly to help people and to create a safer state for us to live in. After many years in politics, do people still have that fire in their belly? I think that's a question people should ask as well.
I remember as a kid about a 16-year-old being at a church function, and Barry Jones, the Labor veteran, was a guest speaker, and somebody asked him a similar question. And he said, look, I don't care which side you vote for, just join a political party. I don't care which side you vote for, just take an active interest. And perhaps, yeah.
Can I mention one more thing as well? One of the things, because this is, as you're right, is my first 2 years in state politics, and what I've been able to see in the party room, which gives me a good sense of politics today, and especially in our Liberal Party, and I share this with lots of people, is in the Liberal Party, we are a group of people that have varied views. And in the party room, we discuss those different views and what our electorate wants from us and how our electorate would feel about different legislation and different policies. And we don't have a party line. We're able to actually vote according to what we think's best for our electorate. And we say, this is why I will support this or won't support this, or why I would like this amendment. And the Premier says, okay, and we can reserve our right to vote how we want. The funny thing is the media, this is my observation the last 2 years, the media will watch that and they say they're divided, they're not together, and they try to create a story out of that. But it's actually the strength of our party is that we can vote how we think is best for our electorate.
Yes. Afra.
Yes, so Paula, I'm going to ask you a bit of a different question now, leading on to Ramadan. So the cultural makeup of South Australia has, transformed over the last 30 years. So I want to ask you, how important do you think these, multicultural iftars are to strengthening our multicultural identity?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good and relevant question, and I'm glad you asked it. I think it's incredibly important. If I can tell you, I talked before about door knocking in my electorate and encouraging people to talk to me as much as they could. And the Pinnacle College in my electorate, when it was first talked about moving in to Golden Grove, there were people that contacted me and told me on their doorsteps they were a bit fearful, and who are these people and what would they be like and what changes that might mean for our local community. And I was able, because I'd been on the council and knew about a Pinnacle College in the city of Tea Tree Gully, I said, they've been in the city of Tea Tree Gully for over 20 years, and and they're lovely people, they're kind people, they're warm people, and they invite us along to events like this. And now, because the Pinnacle College has worked with the broader community to invite them in, the wider community are now inviting the Pinnacle College to their events, and their community gets together as well. And so these events are incredibly important because people get to learn, to break down some of that fear, to find what common values we have, goals, and so it just strengthens us.
Definitely, and I think it's always a good idea to break that stigma over a meal. It's almost like the meal just brings
Yes,
people together.
yes,
Yeah,
that's right. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
thank you.
Paula, that's probably an appropriate place to wind up this conversation. Paula Luethen, Member for King, thank you so much for joining us on this Ramadan conversation.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Happy Ramadan.
And now, Afra, we've time for a little music. A musical interlude provided by Gaji Egishi.
Güzel aşık cevrimizi çekemezsin demedim mi? Bu bir rıza lokmasıdır, yiyemezsin demedim mi? Güzel aşık cevrimizi çekemezsin demedim mi? Bu bir rıza lokmasıdır, yiyemezsin demedim mi? Demedim mi, demedim mi? Gönül sana söylemedim mi? Demedim mi, demedim mi? Gönül sana söylemedim mi? Bu bir rıza lokmasıdır, yiyemezsin demedim mi? Bu bir rıza lokmasıdır, yiyemezsin demedim mi? Yemeyenler kalırını açar, gözlerinden kanlar saçar. Bu bir demdir gelir geçer, duyamazsın demedim mi? Yemeyenler kalırını açar, gözlerinden kanlar saçar. Bu bir demdir gelir geçer, duyamazsın demedim mi? Demedim mi, demedim mi? Gönül sana söylemedim mi? Demedim mi, demedim mi? Gönül sana söylemedim mi? Bu bir demdir gelir geçer, duyamazsın demedim mi? Bu bir demdir gelir geçer, duyamazsın demedim mi?
And that performance from Gazi Egishi in Melbourne. You're with Ramadan Conversations. Well, it's time for our next guest. Afra, our next guest is Miriam Cocking, and Miriam migrated to Australia nearly 40 years ago under a skilled migrant visa as a secondary school teacher. Expert in home economics, first in Melbourne and then Adelaide. She has also spent many years volunteering in her local community across a range of areas, from migrant settlement to mental health, ageing, domestic violence, and even the media. Welcome, Miriam. Miriam, can you hear us?
Yes, hang on. Man, I'm having a problem. Hang on.
That's okay.
Oh my goodness me. Sorry, John, I'm all ready, but now I lost.
After we have these problems from time to time.
Yeah,
Now,
that's fine.
Miriam's come into
okay, now.
She's got
Are
it.
you right there?
There we go.
Okay,
Miriam,
can you see me? Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Good evening,
great
John,
to
and
have
good
you with
evening,
us.
Afra.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for having me.
Miriam, you've been volunteering for most of your adult life. What motivated you?
Well, when I was born and brought up in a home that my parents always believed in making a difference in people's lives. Like if somebody knock on your door and wanting something, don't let her leave the house without anything at hand. Or if somebody asks you to help her, stop what you're doing and help that person. So because I was born and grew up in a big family, that means big family, 9 children, 3
Oh,
cousins,
wow.
2 farm helpers, and my parents. So we were a little community. So that's how I started. We started this culture of volunteering, helping each other and helping the community, helping the church. So I think it's ingrained in me. Let's put it that way. So when I came to South Australia from Victoria, I was walking, familiarizing myself, and I was walking. Actually, I landed at the bay, which I love because the sea is so beautiful. And I live inland back home. So when I saw the sea, I said, I would really love to be able to reside at the bay. And so I did. But familiarizing myself, I was walking a different small streets, short street, looking at the shops. And I saw this sign in one of the op shop, and it says, wanted volunteer. Well, I was interviewed for 5 or 10 minutes or so, and I started helping, and I never looked back.
That's
Wow.
wonderful. Afra.
Yeah, so Miriam, active volunteering, it can also take up a lot of your time because, you have to give so much time and effort into it. And, as a wife and a mother, how are you able to balance these roles?
I guess, fortunately, Afra, I married a very loving and supported husband. I met my husband where I live on the tram, and that's something personal that I like to share. But marrying a husband who is very supportive and believe in you is very, very important. And when I married my husband, I was already volunteering in domestic violence because I was working. I left my teaching post and I thought, well, I'm not qualified to teach secondary school in South Australia, but I was qualified in Victoria. And I was
Yeah.
really shocked that I wasn't qualified to teach secondary school unless I do my bridging course. So with a master in public education, and that was a shock to me. But anyway, so when I met my husband, he was very busy doing fundraising for the multiple sclerosis and also the a charity organization, and we work very, very closely. And so when I started working as a case manager in domestic violence, my husband said that they are your people, help them. That means they are migrants like me. They're not particular Filipino background, but they are migrant like me. And said, support them and I'll support you. So growing, when we had kids, he always say, if you have a meeting, honey, I'll look after the kids. As long as I cook the meal, leave the house clean, he will be happy. So that's how I did it. And he looked after the kids while I was having a meeting, while I'm supporting women of domestic violence, moving them from one shelter to the other, or moving them into emergency accommodation.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Very lucky.
Yes, I am.
It's interesting, Miriam, that our previous guest, Paula Luethen, also expressed an interest in assisting women in domestic violence. That's a very challenging area, and you've also worked with migrant services, migrant settlement. Those sorts of volunteering activities aren't like just being in a charity shop. I mean, they are can be very intense activities that have both good times and bad times. Can you recall for us some of the best and worst along the way, when you've perhaps had second thoughts about your commitment, and also, of course, what have been some of the best moments?
John, I guess one of the incidents that my husband we were having dinner and he said to me, honey, you have to be careful because one of these days we might just have the cops knocking on our door. And long and behold, that was true. because I was assigned to go to York Peninsula to help Filipino women there, and with two police officers working in the multicultural sector unit. And we brought the woman in Adelaide, and because I couldn't get any emergency accommodation, my husband said, well, you ask your agency if he can stay here rather than going to a shelter, because he has two young kids. So, and I said, are you sure? And he said, yes, of course. You can speak to her in your language, you can talk to the kids in your language, and stuff like that. But what I felt that I never ever felt that I have to stop, John. It's I think my philosophy is about, if there are some challenges, you have to face them. If there are some problems, you have to find the solutions for them. So it was always, I think, having a very supportive husband, as I said, it made the life easier and lighter. Those challenges and problems are, it seems to me that they were a lot easier to solve if you have somebody supporting you and backing you.
What's your most rewarding moment?
My most rewarding moments is when I have a part in influencing policies to change systemic issues in service provision. Also is when I see women who were oppressed and in a domestic violence relationship, they're financially poor and lack of independence. When I get them a job, support them in getting a job that they love to do, so that they can support their younger family and move away from that relationship, that really elate me. It is an elation feeling that I get. And also when I am able to coach a woman who would like to push through going back to school and to better themselves, and that really my passion, to see them improve their lifestyle and be a positive contributor of our South Australian community. So when I see women moving from housing commission to another house that they bought, and because they work so hard, they finish their tertiary education, and most of them are nurses actually, and become nurses, and they are financially stable and be able to get their own home.
Afra.
So, Miriam, we had mentioned this with Paula as well. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it's meant that some families have been victimized with their abuser at home, and so in this case as well, with your volunteering, what sort of impact has the pandemic had on your activities? Do you anticipate a greater need for volunteer services emerging as the country recovers? And so what will this mean? What kind of change will it mean for your activities?
I guess look at the bigger picture. A lot of expenses. I mean, we are spending a lot of money to support our people at this point in time. And my concern is what will happen after COVID. Will the services be fully funded, or will they lose some of their funding? Or the outcome of the COVID, will there be more cases as a result of the COVID? Or what about the employment side of things? They are my concern at this point in time. But having said that, we can only wait and see where the government is going and what are they going to be able to plan and put in place for additional resources for the domestic violence.
Yes, I guess all you can be grateful for is that people are raising that as an issue now, that there is going to be greater need and possibly less available financial resources to meet it, and how we do that may have an impact, a great impact on the need for volunteers such as yourself.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And also, John, it's just the volunteer. when I volunteer nearly 40 years ago, I didn't have to produce anything. Okay? I'm volunteering. Nowadays, you have to produce a lot of clearances to be able to
Yes.
produce, especially in the domestic violence area. You have to have national police clearance and all this. And 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 sometimes whether nowadays because of lack of employment, whether we get more volunteers to support these women, I'm not quite sure. So we'll just yet to wait and see.
Let's end this conversation, Miriam, on a slightly different note. Ramadan is the season for the Muslim community at the moment. The month has been very difficult and different this year with COVID-19. How has this very different Ramadan been for you this year?
The way it is planned, actually, I didn't really feel any difference, John, Afra, because what happened, I've been attending the iftar dinner organized by Pinnacle College and the other groups as well. And I think I was given this privilege to be able to observe and enjoy what the programs is all about. It's not about just the dinner being together, but also the variety of speakers that provides informative dialogue or information, guest speakers that provide informative information, I guess, informative topic. It's also the interfaith aspect and the intercultural that I love about it. It is about creating new friends. It's about meeting your brothers and sisters in the Muslim community, but not just in the Muslim community, it's the whole entire community. It is a very inclusive event. And now, when I found out, I was given this information about the conversation forum, and I thought, wow, isn't that great? That it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop in a beautiful ambience, in a good food, but it also provide food for thought and participation of the entire community that they can reach out during this COVID time.
Well, Miriam, thank you for your wonderful contribution to this conversation. It's been a great pleasure to meet you.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure and wishing you the very best. Thank you very much.
Well, Afra, it's time now for another musical interlude. Now, did I get the pronunciation of Gaji's name right? So, how do I pronounce Gaji's name?
Ghazi Al-Kisi.
Ghazi
Yeah.
Erkishi. Well, there we go.
Yes.
From
Yeah,
Melbourne,
you got it.
Ghazi Erkishi, another musical event. Well, there we are. Another beautiful musical performance from Melbourne. Once again, Guzzy, thank you so much for that. And it's time now for our final guest tonight. He's from Sydney. It's Walangari Karntawarra, an Arunta Aboriginal elder from Alice Springs who now lives and works in Sydney. Not only is he an international award-winning painter in the Central Western Desert tradition, but Walangari is also a didge player, a traditional dancer, an arts and education graduate and cross-cultural educator. Walangari's art has been exhibited extensively, both at home and overseas, and he's been awarded both nationally and internationally. Walangari Karntawarra, welcome to this Ramadan conversation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, John, and Ramadan Mubarak to everybody.
Thank you.
And to Afra.
Thank you, Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you.
Walangari, you're familiar with the Indigenous community life of both Sydney and Alice Springs. The current COVID crisis experience for both cities is somewhat different. Are there any particular differences felt by Indigenous communities during this crisis?
I think it's pretty much all the same, really, except that we've had to deal with large families.
Yeah.
And we come from a very extended family culture, and most people are just used to a smaller family, but we miss all of our mob, no matter where they are, and they're spread out everywhere. So we think about them a lot, and we also miss our sorry business as well. But I would like to also just take this opportunity, if I may, to also pay my respects to the traditional owners of Sydney, the nation, to all the elders and future, and I'm always thinking about them as well.
Afra.
So, Walangari, your childhood was spent living a traditional lifestyle in the Australian outback, yet you also carry a European name, Colin McCormack. I hope I pronounced that right.
McCormack?
McCormack.
Irish.
So initially my question is and I've also seen a wonderful photo of your great-great-grandfather, which also seems to reflect this dual identity. So my question is, how do you balance these two identities?
Well, they're just two of my European ancestry, but in my family I'm also a descendant of the Afghans, and I'm also my family have also got Chinese heritage.
A genuine multicultural Australian.
Very much, and if you to my family, they actually look more Afghani than I do, because my father was a full-blood Aboriginal man, so I take on more of the traditional look, from the desert.
Yeah. Mm. Your direct family line includes some of the most notable contributors to the arts in this country from the Indigenous side of your family. The great watercolourist Albert Namatjira, and two of the founding fathers of the Papunya-Tula movement, Clifford Possum and Paddy Carroll. What bearing has this diverse family heritage had on your own development?
Well, it certainly has given me a great sense of pride to know that I come from these people, and and they are my family, and it's just wonderful to have someone, or some people who are of great note, who have really done something not only just for our family, but for Australia and for the world, really, and to really give us a voice, and to let people know that we exist, and we're we don't belong to the old stereotypes of hunters and gatherers. We're actually quite intelligent, and if you look at our history of all the notable people in our history, it ranges from physicists to pilots to all sorts of people. So, we are very diverse in our nature and our cultures, because I say cultures because we belong to a continent that has many countries prior to Captain Cook arriving, and we all have our borders and we all respect our boundaries and we know who we are.
People like Albert Namatjira painted in the European tradition, and people like Clifford Possum and Paddy Carroll in the Papunya tradition. One's traditional, the other is European. Both are regarded as just most important artists in Australian history, both traditions. How did that work with you as you developed your own instincts?
Well, I was guided by both Albert and Clifford, their spirits, and my Jammu, who I call Clifford, is my Jammu, my grandfather, and Albert, who's my great grandmother's brother. So he's my full family, and they both live with my mother's father's father. So my great grandfather, who actually brought and taught Clifford and Albert at a place called Hamilton Downs Station, which I grew up when I was a little boy, pretty much as a stockman, riding horses and chasing bullocks.
Wow. And where did you learn to how does the painting develop out of that?
That came by chance to me, and I guess it resulted from really, having that history of family who paint, and somehow it sort of rubbed off on me, whether I was watching, or just taking note of who was painting around me, and and our way of learning is look, listen, and learn, and that's the way we do it. So, and then one day I was, when I was studying at university in Darwin, I think I was a little bit bored, so I took up the paint, and really that was the start. And and in that whole process of starting painting, I always thought of Albert. So, before Clifford, Grandpa Clifford, he really came after, and it was Albert that really inspired me, because I started off doing landscapes, and the thing about Albert was that he not only did he paint in the European style in watercolors, but he actually painted his dreamings. So all those places that he painted were actually his dreaming places. But he couldn't paint them in the traditional form, because before then it wasn't the way to do things. To reveal your culture to everybody else, so quickly and without consequence.
I remember as a little kid, when I first gained any understanding of art, on my primary school wall in my second grade, our teacher had a copy of Ghost Gums, Albert Namatjira's famous painting, up on the wall there. And I think that was the first time I ever began to understand what a painting was all about. He's had an amazing influence.
Yes. And, we always say no one can paint a gum tree like Albert.
Afra.
He was just a magnificent artist, self-taught, of course, and a genius, we consider. So, and a really revered elder amongst everybody.
So, Walangari, I think the next question that I'm leaning towards is, you did mention that, as, Indigenous people, that you do have various skills and talents. So in the past, horrific fire season has led to calls for the study and the adoption of many Indigenous fire management practices. So are you seeing practical evidence of genuine effort to take on the Indigenous cultural knowledge and experience into account?
There are people who do actually take into account Aboriginal fire management practices and so forth, and our historical history of dealing with fire. Because This country is really was built around fire, and without fire, when the English arrived, when Captain Cook arrived, it would have been just forest everywhere. But when people arrived over 200 years ago, there were plains, there were open areas, pasture lands, and these pasture lands were actually created by fire, so we could feed the kangaroos and all the other animals, and so gave them grasslands. But it was also a way of bringing the prey to you rather than you having to go out and spend all day hunting.
Yeah.
So we had more time to. Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so we had more time to think about things, life and the universe and the dreaming stories, and we're great storytellers. So we would take our children out, and we still do, and take them out in the bush, and there's no greater learning experience than actually being in the bush and learning firsthand how to catch a fish and how to trap and how to take care of it and identify bush medicines and bush foods, and because this whole country is a pharmacopoeia, and and it's just got medicine, and it's everywhere. So we just got to teach people, and that's what we've been trying to do is to show people what a beautiful land this is, and what's actually there, and we are the caretakers, and some of us are the traditional owners and some are caretakers, and so I think if we take on that role of being caretakers, then I think more people will connect to this country and also connect to Aboriginal people, on a common playing field, really, is in terms of looking after the land, and the land will look after you.
It's interesting, Walangari, that over the past year or so, the book Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe, which outlines the way in which Aboriginal communities were engaged in significant agricultural activities, from eel farms to grain harvesting prior to European arrival, has been making something of an impact. But beyond the sort of interesting findings, why do you think it's important that the general thesis of the book is taken notice of in going towards overturning European concepts of sort of historic Indigenous culture? Because there is being a rapid change in that understanding, and Pascoe's book seems to have had some influence on that.
Yes, well, Bruce is a wonderful man. He's a very intelligent being, and certainly a noted elder in our community. And I think a lot of people may get a little bit sort of sidelined by his colour of his skin, but colour doesn't matter to us, because we come from a culture that has blonde hair and blue eyes, and we have all the other traits of other human beings, and that belongs to our genome, we're not concerned about colour or anything like that, but it's knowledge that's paramount, and he's certainly a gentleman who knows a lot about what he's saying, and the Dreamtime and the emu is a very senior story in our cultures, because the emu represents law in our culture, and without that, you wouldn't have the stability that we've had for 50, 60, 100,000 years. And certainly, there's no evidence of war in our cultures, and it doesn't exist. And because we believe that to kill another person is to harm your own personal family. That's why we have big families, and that's why we don't do those things to each other.
Afra.
So, Walangari, the oldest Australians share something in common with the most recent arrivals, and that is the place of our traditional cultures. New migrants often struggle with what is important to hang on to and what's necessary to change. What are the critical issues for you in dealing with this tension?
I think family is central to everything. And respect, and certainly coming from a point of love and honour and dignity, all these things which Aboriginal people strive and also we adhere to. Our culture is based on love and respect, and we want everybody else to do that. It's not a hard thing to respect your fellow man and to love your fellow man, and you know, to show care, you know, in the way Aboriginal people do, because there's certainly a lot of things that the rest of the world can learn from Aboriginal people, you know, but people have to get past their stereotypes and their racist views, because those things still exist, and they bubble away under the surface, and you know, it's through education that you know, we eradicate those types of behaviours and thinking, you know, and to understand that, you know, we're all one people, you know, and historians have a way of changing those viewpoints and you know, for political gain. But you know, Aboriginal people, we tell the truth about families and life on Earth, and you know, and where we play our role and where we've been. You know, we just haven't been in Australia. You know, we're the first people to walk all over the world and around the planet.
Yeah.
Walangari,
Yeah.
we're rapidly having to wind this conversation up, but earlier you mentioned your ancestor Colin McCormack. Now, we've got a photo of Colin here.
Sorry, that's my great grandfather. His name is Charlie Walker. He's a British man. He's British.
Now, that goes to the same point, that here is a man of British heritage, and you come to us, somebody who's talking to us of the tradition of full blood, yet you can talk about being truly, genuinely a multicultural Australian, and you're pleased to talk about that and show us that. Let's just have another look at that image. I'll get you to tell us a little bit about him. So it's Charlie Walker.
So his name is Charlie Walker, and he's on my mother's side. So, but he an interesting history, and you know, he was a very, very wealthy individual when he came to Australia, and you know, and he we're still tracking his story down, but he has a very big role in story that a lot of Australians would know about, and that's the story of Lassiter's Reef, which is the fabled gold mine that exists. And the interesting with that is that he, as a British man, and who I'm a descendant of this chap, he apparently was with maybe the financing of his trip. And then the other point of it is that at the other end of Lassiter's trip was my family, who took care of Lassiter while he was hiding in the cave for a year with a gun in his hand, because he thought that our people were going to eat him, but really they were concerned for his welfare, and they kept on taking food and water to him, but he was too scared to come out of the cave.
That's an extraordinary story. We haven't got time to go into it this evening, but I encourage people to do that. Walangari, you've attended many of Affinity's iftars over the years. You've performed with Amity College. How important are such intercultural gatherings for the future of our social cohesion as Australians?
I think participating in these sort of events, you know, through different cultures and sharing cultures is the greatest thing that Australians can do, because we are a multicultural, no matter what people may think. There's always been a multicultural society, because Aboriginal people, we are multicultural amongst ourselves. We all speak different languages. We all have different cultures. So we had to learn how to get along with each other. So, you know, there is, like I say, there are ways that people can learn from Aboriginal people in the way that we, you know, construct a new beginning, I guess, in the way that we approach, you know, the future, and how we take care not only of the dispossessed or the poor, but, you know, of everybody, and to you know, to share really in the commonwealth of this country, you know, and that's how it should be. You know, make it a more level playing field for everybody.
Walangari, that's a fabulous place to wind up this conversation. Afra, it's been a great discussion, hasn't it? Walangari's, that's just a fabulous contribution for us. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Afra.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. Now, we got a little treat here. I think it's time we asked you to share with us the one thing that we've not spoken of yet this evening. That's something we've been waiting for all evening, your musical mastery of the didgeridoo. We have a little clip here of Walangari, great musician. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. God bless.
Ramadan Mubarak. My name is Walangari Karntawarra, and today I'll be playing this wonderful iconic instrument of Australia called the Yidaki, commonly referred to as the didgeridoo. This is a little blessing that I will be sharing with everyone today. Thank you.
Walangari Karntawarra, didgeridoo player extraordinaire. What a talent. Afra, that's
Definitely.
fabulous, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. I don't know
multi-talent,
how he does it. Yeah.
But you saw around him those beautiful works of art were
Yes.
all prints of his works.
Yeah.
Just
Beautiful.
a great evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Afra. It's been great to have you with us.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. I've learnt so much today. Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for this evening and in today's program. And thank you all at home or wherever you happen to be for joining us for this Ramadan conversation. Make sure you tune in for our next episode tomorrow as we fly off to places afar. Over the past week, our conversations have featured a number of well-known guests. If you wish to view this or any of this series of Ramadan conversations, you can find them on the Affinity YouTube channel. Stay safe. Have a blessed Ramadan.